What's up everybody? My name is Seth and this is part 2 of my videos on the 2025 NAMM show. If you missed part 1, I'll have a link to it in the description box down below so you can go check it out. Like I mentioned in the previous video, this was my first time ever at the NAMM show, and unfortunately filming at the show did not go exactly as I planned for a variety of reasons. So in order to give you guys the best and most coherent experience I can possibly provide, I'm going to basically recap my days at the show and show some pictures and footage of some of the cool things I saw while I was there. So without further ado, let's continue where we left off in part 1. On day 2, I started off the day by checking out the exhibit hall on the lower level of the convention center just because I actually hadn't been there once the entirety of day 1. Compared to upstairs, the lower level of the exhibit hall was actually a lot more calm and chill. My first stop, interestingly enough, was actually Mule Resophonic Guitars, where they had a flying mule display with actual flapping wings, which pretty much immediately catapulted that booth to one of my favorites at the entire NAMM show. Those of you who have been following my channel and watched a few videos can probably tell that I'm not really a resonator player most of the time, but in addition to making awesome looking traditional resonators, Mule also makes a guitar called the Mulecaster, which I first heard about a few years ago and pretty much immediately became fascinated by, so I had to stop by the booth and try one out for myself. I'm very happy to report that, at least for me personally, the Mulecaster was even more awesome in person, especially in the short scale baritone setup that they had the Telecaster shaped one in. I absolutely loved playing that guitar. It felt substantial, I guess is the best way to describe it, but substantial in the best way possible. Had a big chunky neck, really thick strings, and it definitely had some heft to it, but man, it felt unlike anything else I have ever played, and it was unique in, again, just the best way possible. I absolutely want to own one of those someday. It also doesn't hurt that the entire Mule Guitars team that was at the NAMM show were super nice people, and I really enjoyed talking to all of them. After I was done at the Mule booth, I made my way upstairs and went to the Valiant Guitars booth, where I was able to try a Jupiter, a Smith, and the newly released Titan model, all of which felt really great to me. For those of you who might not be familiar with Valiant, they're actually a Ukrainian company, and from the looks of things, it seems like they manufacture a lot of their hardware and things themselves, so their guitars come equipped with a lot of really cool bridges and an adjustable brass nut that I've never seen on any other guitars but Valiant guitars. The Titans were definitely my favorite of all the guitars that I tried, but honestly, I'd be happy owning any of their guitars because every single thing I picked up felt very high quality and rock solid. I then made my way over to the Third Man hardware booth, which is actually Jack White's company, for those of you who didn't know that. Mostly just because I thought the booth looked really cool, and also because they had a popcorn machine. Because I'm mostly using amp modelers and things these days, I don't really buy pedals too much, but I have to say, I think Third Man really has nailed their aesthetic, and every single thing that they had on display at the booth looked really awesome. In addition to the pedals, there were also some really cool looking guitars at the booth too, one of which was actually a crazy blue Fender custom shop version of Jack White's signature triple caster, but unfortunately, I occasionally lack situational awareness and almost completely glossed over that guitar in my footage, so you can really only see it for a few seconds. After that, I headed over to the Ibanez booth, but admittedly didn't spend too much time there since A, it felt a bit crowded given the layout of the booth, and B, I'm not really much of an Ibanez guy these days just because I prefer slightly rounder necks and fingerboards. Sorry, Ibanez fans. That said, Ibanez definitely makes some cool looking guitars, and it seemed like there were quite a few new things on display, so it was cool to see. I also very briefly stopped by the Orange Amps booth just because I thought it looked really cool, but honestly, there wasn't really too much to try out at the booth, so I didn't spend too much time there. Sorry, fans of Orange. After that, I kind of wandered around for a little bit before making my way up to the Yamaha area, which you can't really call a booth because Yamaha was having a full-on concert in their section of the convention center, in addition to displaying an astronomically insane number of different instruments. I honestly forget just how many different things Yamaha actually makes when it comes to musical instruments. While I was there, I got to try out some of the new Yamaha acoustic guitars, and I have to say, I thought they sounded and felt really good, and I'm not usually someone who likes the sound of an acoustic guitar plugged in. I also got to see some Revstars, which was cool for me since the Revstar is still one of my favorite, more budget-friendly guitars that I've personally ever owned. And I also got to mess around a little bit on the new Pacificas, which felt really solid to me. The Revstar is honestly still more my speed just because I tend to prefer things that lean more to the Gibson side of electric guitars, but honestly, I really did like the Pacificas that I tried, and I'd definitely be interested in spending more time with them in the future. After leaving the awesome insanity that was the Yamaha section of the convention center, I went and checked out Reverend guitars for the first time. To me, every guitar I tried at the Reverend booth seemed like a really solid workhorse guitar, and for the most part, everything had its own vibe visually, so they're definitely a unique guitar company for sure. Speaking of solid guitars that have their own vibe visually, my next stop was actually the Vola Guitars booth. I've heard a lot of good things about Vola over the years, but again, like with most of these companies, I've never had the opportunity to try some of their guitars myself. I actually played several guitars while I was there, and I thought they all felt and sounded very, very good. They definitely lean more to the Ibanez side of things in terms of feel, but there was just enough roundness to the necks and fretboards to where I still found them very comfortable. I was also kind of shocked to see that the guitars weren't really all that expensive despite being very high quality Japanese made guitars, so Vola is definitely another one of those companies that I'd be really interested in checking out more in the future. I ended day 2 by checking out some Suhr guitars for the first time, and everything I played there felt great as well. Suhr is yet another one of those companies that I've been very interested in for a long time, but because I don't have a Suhr dealer anywhere near me, I never would have really got the opportunity to try one without buying it if I hadn't been able to go to the NAMM show. So it was really cool to finally be able to try a Suhr guitar, or in my case, several Suhr guitars for the first time. By day 3, I was honestly pretty tired, so I didn't see nearly as much as I did on the previous 2 days. Even still, I still feel like I saw quite a few really cool things at the show. I started out the day by checking out the Abasi booth, which every other day was pretty much immediately swarmed, but fortunately for me, at that point in the morning, the crowd hadn't really started to form yet. Now, normally, extended range guitars, especially 8 strings, are something I try to avoid as much as possible just because I have pretty small hands, and most of the time the necks on those guitars are way too wide to be comfortable for me. That said, the Abasi guitars have a much narrower string spacing than pretty much any other 7 or 8 string guitar I've tried in the past, so they were a lot more comfortable for my hands. If I'm ever in the market for another 7 or 8 string guitar in the future, I'd honestly probably try to get an Abasi. Afterwards, I stumbled across the Prestige Guitars booth, who I actually hadn't ever heard of before, but because I'm a huge fan of Les Paul style single cuts, their booth pretty much immediately caught my attention. After talking with Jaden at the booth, who was also a very nice guy, I learned that all the guitars that were being displayed were actually Canadian-made guitars with very high quality components, and every single one that I picked up felt great to me. My personal favorite guitar at the Prestige booth was probably the Bandit with the black pickguard, mostly just because these days I've been really into that hot-rodded Les Paul Jr. look, but also because that guitar actually was made with an ash body rather than the mahogany that you usually see on that style of guitar, and I thought it looked really cool. I would love to get one of those for myself someday, and if I ever do, you could definitely expect to see a video on the channel about it. I also went to the Dunable Guitars booth to check out some of those for the first time, since I've heard nothing but praise for Dunable guitars since I first heard about them several years ago. For me at least, I feel like all that praise was definitely warranted because every guitar I tried at the Dunable booth felt and sounded great, though admittedly the only guitar I got to plug in was one of their import models. Even still, both the USA and the import stuff was so impressive that Dunable Guitars is now added to my ever-growing list of guitars I would very much love to check out again in the future. While at Dunable, I was also pretty surprised to see that they're collaborating with Claudio Sanchez from Coheed and Cambria on the new Jackhammer guitar. To me, this guitar looks kind of like a cross between a Gibson RD and some type of BC Rich, so it's not necessarily my thing visually, but it's pretty cool to see because I'm a huge Coheed and Cambria fan. I also noticed that Claudio Sanchez was going to be at the Dunnable booth later that day to do a signing, so I definitely went back to that and got some stuff signed, and that was pretty awesome, honestly. Also, as a quick side note, while reviewing my footage of the Dunnable booth, I noticed that there was someone at NAMM dressed as Guy Fieri, and that honestly made me laugh quite a bit. After a little bit more final day exploration of the show floor, I eventually made my way to the Eastman Guitars booth and tried out a couple of the new Fuller Tone models. To me, they all looked, felt, and sounded great, but my preference was definitely for the Ice Blue SC52 model. The neck joint on these was also pretty interesting, and it wasn't like anything else I personally have ever seen before, but the real big surprise to me was when I saw that these guitars were coming in at under $1,000. I know Eastman has a reputation for making very high quality, affordable guitars, but I've never had the chance to try one before, so it's really cool to see a guitar that felt this good being in that price bracket. So I'm definitely interested in trying out some more Eastman stuff in the future. Overall, I have to say that the NAMM show was pretty awesome, and I'd love to go again next year. It was definitely a bit overwhelming at times, mostly just because it's so different from anything I've ever been to, and there's so many cool things happening every single day that it's just not possible to see everything, unfortunately. Even now, after I've gotten home, the entire NAMM experience feels a little surreal to me because in addition to being surrounded by some of the coolest guitars and gear imaginable, I also got to see and meet a lot of the people that inspired me to even make a YouTube channel in the first place. I'm someone who's been watching guitar-related YouTube videos ever since I was a teenager, so being in a position where you're around all these people that I've been watching and I've been entertained by and inspired by just still feels absolutely crazy to me. I also just quickly want to say that every single person I talked to at the NAMM show was incredibly kind, and as someone who struggles with anxiety, I'm very appreciative of that. I really enjoyed meeting and talking to every single person I interacted with at the show, whether they were staff, a general attendee, an artist, or someone working a booth. If you're somebody that I talked to at the show and you're watching this, thank you so much for being a cool person. And that pretty much concludes my NAMM 2025 experience. Before I go, I just want to say a huge thank you to the NAMM PR team for inviting me to the show, and I also want to say a huge thank you to all you guys who watch my videos and subscribe to the channel, because without that, I don't think I would have gotten an opportunity to do something as cool as this. So to each and every one of you, thank you so much for your support over the years. Sorry, some of the footage was kind of all over the place, but I hope you enjoyed hearing about my first time at the NAMM show. As always, thank you so much for watching. Stay safe out there, and hopefully I'll be back with another video soon.